As someone who loves playing the tank class in Dungeons and Dragons, I always leaned into using my reckless attacks as a barbarian. It's a great way to be able to help ensure that your attacks land when you hit against a villain. And I always just love playing the character that is able to dish out a lot of damage and can also play as a type of guardian for your party as well too. So reckless attacks really helps to make sure that when you are swinging your great axe or a great sword, that you're landing and probably going to kill off that villain that you're attacking in front of you. But surprisingly, I've had players at my tables who play Barbarian that are hesitant about using reckless attacks. Now, if you're not familiar with what reckless attack does in Dungeons and Dragons for barbarians, reckless attack says you can throw aside all concern for defense to attack with increased ferocity. When you make your first attack roll on your turn, you can decide to attack recklessly. Doing so gives you advantage on attack rolls using strength until the start of your next turn, but attack rolls against you have advantage during that time. So understandably, some of those players who play barbarians are a little reluctant about using reckless attack because that means that all of the villains, if they see that you are attacking recklessly, they're probably going to gang up on you and all get advantage against their attacks against you, which means that they're probably more likely going to succeed in hitting against you. And to that I say, let them. See, as a barbarian, your job is not only to dish out a lot of damage, but it's also to take a lot of damage as well too. That's why at level 1, you have the rage ability that allows you to take half damage on physical damage that is delivered to you. Now, it won't give you resistance to non-physical damage like cold or fire damage or anything elemental or anything like that, but you could definitely help mitigate that a little bit with magic items or even taking the subclass Path of the Wild Heart, which gives you resistance to different elemental damage. But as a barbarian, you're going to be taking the brunt of those attacks because you have more hit points than any other class in Dungeons and Dragons, which means that you're going to stay up longer, you are going to take more hits, and you can serve as a lightning rod against all the other villains, which means that they're probably going to focus on you a little bit, which makes it so that your party members can feel a little bit safer. Then they can help you out in trying to, strategize how to take out the rest of the villains, as the majority of them are probably going to be focusing on you because they know that you are the person that they need to try to take down first. And doing reckless attacks can also present itself with a lot of great roleplay opportunities. Reckless attack can show that maybe you care for your party members so much that you don't care what happens to you. You want to make sure that they're protected. Or maybe that's your way of showing that your ferocity is going to be intimidating to your foes. Or maybe it's just something along the lines that, your character is just careless, either because they don't care what happens to them or they're just oblivious to the fact that, people are going to go after them. So there's a lot of great role playing that you can do when you use reckless attack. And when you look at the martial classes in Dungeons and Dragons, barbarians are different than all the other ones because they really rely more on intuition than they do with training, like what fighter or paladins or rangers or rogues might have when they do their attacks. So reckless attacks makes a lot of sense in that way because they're just going based off of instinct rather than something that they were trained for. Mechanically, there's a lot of great reasons why you want to use reckless attacks as well too, and I'm going to be using the 2024 rules to describe why you might want to use reckless attacks. First, let's talk about opportunity attacks. If you use reckless attack on your turn, that means that you get advantage on any strength-based attack until the start of your next turn, which means that if you have an opportunity attack, you can use advantage on that attack against that villain who's trying to get out of your reach. At level 9 for Barbarians, you get something called Brutal Strike, which allows you to add a d10 to your damage if you use Reckless Attack but forego any advantage you have on that attack. So you're still making a straight d20 roll. Enemies will still have advantage attacks against you. By level 9, you're going to have 2 attacks per attack action, which means that only one of the attacks you have to forego the advantage. And if you still hit with that attack, then you add a d10 to that damage, and then your next attack can be with advantage still as well too. So there's a lot of damage output you can use once you get to level 9 and you use Brutal Strike with that. Now, if you pick Path of the Berserker for your subclass, then at level 3, you get something called Frenzy Attack. Frenzy Attack allows you to add more damage to the first creature you hit if you attack recklessly. So if you attack recklessly and you hit a creature with that attack, then you get to add a number of d6s equals to your damage rage bonus. So at level 3, you're going to be adding 2d6s plus whatever weapon you're hitting with against that villain every single time you do reckless attacks on each turn that you have. That's a lot of damage for Path of the Berserker every time. Another nice thing about reckless attack is that if you're in a situation where you have disadvantage on your attacks, if you attack recklessly, then you can cancel that out and still be able to make a straight attack roll. Now, again, villains will still have advantage against you on their attacks until the start of your next turn, but it's a good way to try to help ensure that given the circumstances, your attacks still land by being able to cancel out that disadvantage. And if you use things like weapon master properties like cleave and nick, then it helps increases the chances of you taking out more villains that way by being able to give you more opportunities to attack with the weapons that you have and attack more creatures that way as well too. So even though you're going to get targeted with advantage attacks, there's still a lot of benefits for you to use reckless attack for all the reasons I just stated. So when should you not use reckless attack?
Never. You should always use reckless attack.
Okay, so as much as I want to leave it at that, there might be a few circumstances where you might not want to use reckless attacks. For starters, if your armor class is low, then that means that an attack with advantage against you is going to be more likely to hit. Now, as a barbarian at level 1, you do get a feature called unarmored defense, which says that your armor class is calculated as 10 plus your dexterity modifier plus your constitution modifier, as long as you're not wearing any armor. Now, the thing about that is, in order to get a high armor class number for that, you would have to, really do some dump stats in here. And dump stats meaning that you would lower your ability scores in order to increase other ones. So in point buy, you can get a score of a 16 in strength, 16 in dexterity, and 16 in constitution if you put dump stats for intelligence, wisdom, and charisma by marking them as 8, 8, and 8 respectively. So that does give you an AC of 16, but that does mean you get a -1 for anything that uses wisdom, intelligence, or charisma. And I know for myself, I'm somebody that I might use a dump stat for one of the ability scores. I hate to use it for all three, and it really encourages that whole, all brawn, no brain kind of barbarian. I like to make, more complicated, complex, interesting barbarians in that as well too. But if that's the way you want to play it and that's what you want to do, then that definitely helps with trying to reduce the chances of you getting hit with an attack with advantage. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can use unarmored defense and still use a shield and gain that +2 from your shield to your armor class. So technically, you could use unarmored defense with a AC 16 and then use this armor to bump it up to AC 18. It does mean that you're not going to be able to use a two-handed weapon for that reason. So if you want to use something like a great axe or a great sword or maul, then you won't be able to use a shield. Now, you can still use medium armor and have that on, and that allows you to still do rage, and that also allows you to not have to use dump stats if you don't want to go that route. And I think that's still a good way to do it, and you can think about how you might want to try to get improved armor later on in the D&D campaign, but it does mean that your AC probably won't get as high, or there's, trade-offs with it as well too. You might get armor that allows you to get a higher AC, but you might have to be rolling with disadvantage whenever you do a stealth check and things like that. So there are trade-offs to doing either way. Another thing to think about is that if you're going up against villains that mostly do non-physical damage, so they do some sort of magical damage like force damage or cold or fire damage or something like that, then that might not be the time to do reckless attacks, because to do that, that gives them advantage against you, which means that you're not going to be able to use your rage to mitigate any sort of damage that you're going to take on. So that might be something you might want to be a little bit more strategic about if you know that those villains are not going to be hitting you with piercing, slashing, or bludgeoning damage. And so you might want to think about how you might approach that situation if reckless attack is truly what is needed in that moment. And you also have to keep in mind that when you use reckless attack, that means any attack against you has advantage. So it's not just melee attacks. It can be range attacks, or it can be spell attacks as well too. So if you're in a situation where the villains are pretty spread out, then they can still hit you with advantage if you attack recklessly. So you might want to think about how you might try to get closer to a couple of villains, so that way you can reduce the distance of you having to get to them and get a little bit closer to melee range, and then use reckless attack. So you might want to forego using reckless like the first or second round in order to get closer and get into better position of the enemies, so that way they're not hitting you at a distance and then you can't do anything about it. Now, after all that is said, if you're still playing a barbarian, you're a little bit hesitant about using reckless attacks because of advantage attacks against you, there are a few ways that might help you mitigate it that might make you feel better about using reckless attack. First of all, there are magic items that can help with this. The one that comes to mind for me is the Cloak of Displacement, which means that attacks against you have disadvantage until you take damage, and then that goes away until the start of your next turn. So if you're wearing that as a barbarian and you attack recklessly, then people have a disadvantage on the attacks against you, which means that even though they have advantage from a reckless attack, that disadvantage now pretty much cancels it out, which means it's a straight d20 roll attack. So that helps in that circumstance. And there's other magic items that could be helpful or beneficial for you, both official magic items as well as homebrew items and things like that. But that might be something that can help. There's also weapons that have certain weapon master properties that can help as well too. So there are weapons that have a property called Vex, which means that if you hit with that weapon, then your next attack on that creature has advantage. And there's also a weapon master property called Sap, which means that if you hit the villain with your weapon, then their next attack roll is done with disadvantage. Now, that's only the next attacks, and the weapons that have these properties tend to be ones that aren't used by barbarians. Barbarians can still use them, don't get the wrong, but they're not the heavy weapon or two-handed property weapons that you see barbarians have. And so you are sacrificing the damage die output of what you can do as a barbarian to have that weapon master property to use. And the other thing to think about here as well too is that even if you use a weapon with Vex, that gives you advantage on the next attack roll. In some circumstances, there are things that still requires you to attack recklessly. So if you are a Path of the Berserker, or if you want to use Brutal Strike, it doesn't matter if you have Vex on that weapon. You have to use reckless attack, and for Brutal Strike, you have to forego any advantage in order to get that extra d10 damage as well too. So it's not enough just to have advantage. You have to use reckless attack in some circumstances. The other thing to think about is talk to your party and have some teamwork going on. Okay, if you are attacking recklessly and all attacks have advantage against you, your party members might be able to help you out with either some of the features or spells or actions or features that they have. For example, the Clockwork Sorcerer has an ability where they can use a reaction to give somebody disadvantage on an attack roll against them or on another creature that they see as well too. So that's a good way to be able to talk to your party and be like, here's a strategy that we should have going in, and to help you mitigate that a little bit if you're worried about getting a hit with an attack with advantage in a combat situation. Also, when you get to level 4, 8, 12, and 16, you do take on a feat that you can opt into using, and there are some feats that will help you out with this. For example, the Lucky feat gives you a number of luck points per day, and you can spend a luck point to give an enemy disadvantage on an attack roll against you, which means that will cancel out the advantage attack for your reckless attack that you used. You can also get the Poisoner feat, which means that you can create poison and as a bonus action, add poison to your weapon. And if you hit an enemy with that and they fail a Constitution saving throw, then they get the poison condition until the start of your next turn, which when you get a poison condition, that means that all ability checks and attacks are done with disadvantage. There's also the Slasher feat that can help as well too, because when you roll a critical hit against somebody, then that means that their attacks are used with disadvantage until the start of your next turn. But the thing is that rolling a natural 20 to get that condition is going to be a little bit tougher to achieve than the other feats that I mentioned. And also another helpful feat that doesn't really deal with the advantage disadvantage situation, but does help you as a barbarian, is taking on the Tough feat, because the Tough feat allows you to increase your hit point maximum by twice your character level. So that's going to give you a lot more hit points for you to have as your character, which means that it's going to be a little bit harder to take you down with attacks as well too. You can also think about different character options as well. When you create a character, you pick a species, and some species have resistance to other kinds of damage as well too. So it's not going to help with the advantage and disadvantage situation necessarily, but in terms of thinking about taking on other kinds of damage that's not physical, choosing a species that has that inherently will definitely be something to think about. So Aasimar has resistance to necrotic and radiant damage. When you're a dragonborn, Dragonborn, you have resistance to a specific kind of damage depending on which ancestry you pick. Dwarves have resistance to poison damage and advantage on ending or against getting the poison condition as well too, which is really helpful. And tieflings have resistance to fire damage as well too. So those are some options that you can choose for your character to help with that. Another thing to think about as well too in terms of barbarian subclass is Path of the Wild Heart. There is an option that allows you when you rage to select bear as your animal that you're invoking, and that gives you resistance to elemental damage as well too while you're raging. So you get resistance to acid, fire, cold, lightning, thunder damage as well when you're raging. So that can help you with mitigating some of that damage that you might get in other kinds of attacks. Now, hopefully, I've convinced you to use reckless attacks more as a barbarian, but if you're still hesitant, I'll give you one last thought to think about, and that is epic moments very rarely come from playing it safe. You could definitely think about and do the math on the likelihood of your attacks landing against a villain and then how often their attacks will land against you if you give them advantage to their attacks. But at the end of the day, the barbarian is about embracing that spirit of using intuition and just using their natural ferocity to try to take out as many enemies as possible. And doing that chaotic spirit of the barbarian is going to be able to give you those epic moments that you'll remember for a lifetime. I know there's been a lot of moments like that when I've used reckless attack that allowed me to have some of the greatest moments in our combat that I still remember to this day. And so at the end of the day, definitely do what you think you want to do for your character, what you want to do as a player. But I definitely encourage you to think about using reckless attacks more. And if you have used reckless attacks, definitely leave a comment for me to let me know when you use reckless attack and what epic moment came from that, because I would love to hear those stories. And one last thing before I let you all go, I do want to let you know that I am probably in the next month or two going to start doing some live streaming where I will take some of the resources that I've been gaining over the last couple of years, either through purchasing them or been sending advanced reading copies, and going to do a live stream where I open those up and kind of look through it. And so I would love to have you all come to those live streams. I'm probably going to do it like on a Sunday or Monday or something like that. I haven't quite figured out the details, but stay tuned for that. Follow me on the socials, keep watching these videos, and I will definitely update that once I have an idea when I'm going to start using that. The other thing I want to let you all know is that I am in an actual play. It's a mini campaign that is on the Twitch channel for D&D with D, and I'll put a link in the description below, where we are playing every other Monday at I think around 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it's called Broken Chains. And we're actually playing to raise money for a great nonprofit organization called Americans for Immigrant Justice. So I encourage you to come watch, hang out, enjoy what we have to play with, and hopefully you can donate to a great cause as well too. So definitely check us out. Thank you very much for watching this video. Hopefully I am convincing you more and more to try out Barbarians and to try out Reckless Attacks if you are a Barbarian. Let me know what epic moments you're coming up with in your games. Thank you.